Joining me now is Congressman Kilmer. Congressman, thanks for coming on.
You bet. Great to be with you.
You are the vice chair of the New Democrat Coalition, and the coalition just unveiled the Economic Opportunity Agenda with the mission to, quote, lower costs, fight inflation, and grow the middle class. So can you give us an overview here? What does that look like?
Yeah, and thanks for having me. Our economic opportunity agenda is really the New Democrat Coalition's approach to help grow our economy. It targets some key sectors like like global supply chains and workforce development, things like energy and housing and food production to create a more robust and a more inclusive economy. And our agenda is really focused on not just addressing some of the immediate concerns like inflation and job creation, but also on long-term strategies like diversifying supply chains, investing in clean energy, reforming our tax system, with an aim of making our economy more resilient and more sustainable over the long haul.
Let's talk about that a little further. How do you make the economy more resilient for the long haul?
Well, the good news is you've seen over the last couple of years some real progress. The New Democrat Coalition partnering with the Biden administration, and on some issues, our colleagues across the aisle, to have some bipartisan successes that are focused on economic growth. Things like the bipartisan infrastructure law, things like the CHIPS and Science Act, some of the efforts focused on fighting inflation and growing the middle class. So part of our focus is on implementation in that regard, but there's also recognition that there's more that needs to happen. And some of the efforts that I just raised around things like strengthening supply chains and workforce development so that we get all of our best players on the field within our economy is a priority for our coalition, and I think an important step toward growing our economy.
I do want to break this down section by section, but first I do
Sure.
want to go along the point of what you said which is more work needs to be done. As we know, the latest CPI report shows that inflation is down to a 2-year low. But there is a big but there. A reporter here at Forbes, Derek Saul, and I talked about this but, and the but is sticky prices. And I just want to read some of his reporting by the numbers. Prices for items excluding food and energy are up almost 5% year over year. Rent and homeowners' monthly payments soared by 8% because of sticky demand and climbing mortgage payments. Gas and used car prices fell, which is always a good sign, but other costs related to vehicles are on the rise. Car insurance is up 17% year over year, and auto maintenance and repair fees rose 13%. So what does this agenda do to address those concerns for Americans?
Yeah, there's different pieces of it. Some areas where we've seen increase in prices have been related to supply chain disruption. We're still, as a consequence of the pandemic, trying to dig out from some of the disruption caused by the pandemic. And so there's a whole section of our agenda that's focused on supply chains. There's also recognition that there's more steps that can be taken to lower energy prices as we transition to a clean energy economy. Things like efforts to build on the permitting reform progress that occurred at the end of last year, so we can streamline some of these clean energy infrastructure investments. Over the long haul, will reduce some of our energy costs for consumers and for businesses. You mentioned housing. We need a whole lot more housing. We have a supply side challenge on the housing front. And we've got proposals that are focused on doing things like eliminating some of the discriminatory zoning policies that might inhibit new housing construction, things like strengthening the low-income housing tax credit, which is a really valuable tool for changing the arithmetic so that if I'm a property owner, if I'm a home builder, that the math works to construct more housing that people can actually afford. Then finally, there's a big piece of our proposal that's just focused on trying to reduce some out-of-pocket costs for the American people. Things like the child tax credit, which provides financial assistance to families and helps them make purchases of the things that they need. That helps everybody in our economy, not just lowering the poverty rate for American kids, but helping every family in our country. We've seen some progress on the healthcare side, but there's more that needs to be done to lower healthcare costs, as you mentioned, and to expand health coverage. Among the things that we have proposed includes extending the enhanced premium tax credits, fixing the Medicaid gap, dealing with things like the cost of insulin, which affects a whole lot of families. That was covered in last year in the Inflation Reduction Act for seniors, for folks who are on Medicare. we've got a proposal to do that for everybody. And again, all of these are, I think, common sense steps. Nearly everything in our proposals has seen some bipartisan support. And so our hope is that we can see progress, get some of these ideas across the finish line, and help the American people.